Hello and welcome to another Louisburgh Community TV video. Welcome to Tertulia,
a bookshop like no other.
We're coming to you again this week from our schoolhouse in Louisburgh, so you're very welcome. This week we've got two sessions for you. The first is with Haleh Agar. It's her first novel. She's a lady from Montreal but lives in London. Her book is called Out of Touch. It's based around sibling family relationships. She's going to read a piece from her novel, and yeah, it's really good to hear her. And we will have some of her books next week, which we'll be able to post out to people. And after that, we've got Lucas Cries On, our resident philosopher. We're going to be asking him, or I'm going to be asking him 3 questions, which Neil asked me last week, didn't you?
That's right.
So we'll have those in a moment. So what have you been reading this week, Neil?
Right, well, I've just finished reading one of my favourite books, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. The film itself was Humphrey Bogart and directed by John Huston. Just a fantastic movie. And what was amazing was this book was written in German, which is kind of strange considering that it's American hobos down in Mexico, of all things. But one disappointment about the book, there's my favourite line from the movie was not in it, which is, "Where's your badges? We don't need no stinking badges." It wasn't in the book, but apart from that, fantastic book. Recommend it to anybody. And we have a copy in the book shop once we open.
And yeah, this week we found out that Post are offering a special discount rate on postage for independent bookshops. So we're able to post books for $2.95, any weight of books or any amount of books to people. So we will be resuming posting, so anyone's interested, email us or phone us. So now over to Haleh Agar for her piece.
Hi everyone, my name is Haleh Agar and I'm the author of the novel Out of Touch. So I wrote Out of Touch because I love looking at stories that are about families. I love exploring relationships with these people that we cannot choose because basically we're stuck with our family. So in Out of Touch, I explore the relationship between a brother and a sister when their father gets in touch after over 20 years. So I'll be reading an excerpt from the first chapter of Out of Touch for you today. Thank you again to Tertulia for giving me this amazing opportunity. So chapter 1 from Out of Touch. Spring. A man hit Ava with his car a few miles from her bungalow. He said he didn't mean to do it. Ava told him she believed him. "Of course I believe you." She said it like that in the dark. "It was an accident." "Of course." It wasn't possible to see what he looked like lying on her side in that muddy ditch, and she didn't move her neck, afraid she'd cause it damage. The pain in her back and hips felt bright and urgent, and yet a calmness washed through Ava. She didn't need to decide what to do about her father's letter. Her mind could rest here. The man phoned the emergency services and relayed questions to her. "They're asking if you're bleeding anywhere." He might have said that. Ava's attention wavered. She felt him hovering over her, but didn't mind because he smelt like a fresh bar of soap, clean and sharp. "I can't be sure about the bleeding," he said. "It's hard to see in the dark." The urgency in his voice reminded Ava of her grandmother Katrina and the rushed way she used to shout into the phone when she called her brother in Greece, trying to reach him across all that land and sea. "The ambulance people want to know about your vision." 2 long and shaky fingers appeared in front of Ava's nose. "How many is that?" 2? "Good." The man's voice brightened. "Yeah, she said the right number of fingers." But when the call ended, he spoke to her again with agitation. "Why were you out here? It's dangerous walking on this road at night." "I needed to clear my head." Ava's eyes darted up, but all she could see were nettles. She thought of asking the man to look for her father's letter, but he was so full of anxiety pacing back and forth above her that she left it. He introduced himself as Sam. "Ava, I'd shake your hand, but..." He didn't laugh. It was the same at work. Jokes met with silence. If she survived this, she would learn to be funny. Headlights cut through the darkness, but there were no sirens, and soon the lights faded into the night. All they could do now was wait. Wait for the ambulance, wait to see if she would live or die. Could she still feel her legs? The brown thaw of spring lingered there in her nostrils, conjuring a memory of those awful white stockings she'd worn as a child, kicking a ball to her father on Hampstead Heath. When it rained, they'd become thick with mud, itchy stockings that rolled at her knees, at her ankles. Before her bath, Ava would paw at her legs, leaving red scratches all over her flesh. Her sexual experiences in adulthood often fell short of the satisfaction she'd felt as a girl, tearing off those thick white stockings and scratching. "You're a mess," her mother had told her, putting foam into the bath, and Ava had thought, so are you. Sam asked where she lived. "My bungalow's on the same side of the road, about 5 miles towards Welton." "Well, it's too bad your house isn't facing the river." Ava laughed, and everything below her head tightened into thick knots of pain. "Those houses on the river cost about 100 grand more." "That much?" "At least." She knew because she'd asked an estate agent when she'd been thinking of selling the place before Christmas. The agent had looked at Ava and pursed her showy red lips. "Pity it's not facing the river," she had said. "I live near the high street with my parents," Sam offered. It surprised Ava that he should live with his parents. She had assumed from the deep tone of his voice that he was tall, broad-shouldered, approaching middle age. Had he taken over his parents' basement in the way that some lost, lonely men did? But Ava was in no position to judge, having lived with her mother until the day she died. In that time, she'd only ever brought one man back to the bungalow, and he'd liked staying late into the morning so he could have coffee with her mother. Watching them laugh and share stories, Ava had thought how they made a lovely pair. When she told her mother this, because there was nothing she'd wanted more than for her mother to be happy again, the crease on her mother's forehead had deepened. Apart from this man, who eventually bored Ava like the others, no boyfriends ever came to the house. It was Ava who traveled out late at night to meet men who'd rather sleep alone. She preferred it that way, returning to her room and spreading out in her own bed. So that was an excerpt from my novel, Out of Touch. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to Tertulia for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to meeting you in Ireland, hopefully soon.
Thanks, Holly. That was brilliant. And now, Brie, you've been reading something about poetry this week?
Yeah, it's a new book coming out, which we will have soon in the bookshop. It's called A Little History of Poetry by John Carey. Sounds like a really lovely book. He also writes for the Times, I think. And the book was reviewed by Sebastian Fawkes. He's writing this piece, who's famous, well, I think his first book was Birdsong, and then Paris Echo, A Day in December. Yeah, he's been writing a long time. But he talks about poetry, which is really interesting. Last summer, I tried to convert 2 people who said they couldn't see the point of poetry. I read them extracts from Tennyson's Ulysses, Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, and Charlie Causley's Eden Rock, finishing with Donal Óg, a Gaelic ballad that goes like an arrow to the synapses, where the currents of heart and teardrop meet. They sat there, this is the 2 people, they sat there stony-faced. It was like watching 2 people for whom both Bach's St. Matthew Passion and the Beatles' Penny Lane are just noise. Poetry functions in a part of the brain we may be losing, an area connected to our past, where remembered speech rhythms helped to develop consciousness in pre-literate societies. It is therefore possible that an inability to appreciate poetry is not a failing of taste or education, but an evolutionary phenomenon, like a lack of wisdom teeth. So the book goes into that. He also talks about the first poem, just to remind us of that, nearly 4,000 years ago in Western Asia, the Epic of Gilgamesh was etched into clay tablets with bits of reed. It's the oldest known surviving literary work, and one that we think of as poetry, although we know nothing of its author or how it was originally perceived. It pioneered what will become two of poetry's perennial subjects, love and death, and uses mythological motifs that later, through Homer, became an essential part of Western poetry's imaginative universe. So it does sound like a fantastic book, and one we definitely will have in the shop. So over to Lucas.
Over to Lucas.
Hi Lucas, thanks for coming on to Louisburgh Community TV and Tertulia TV. So as we said last week, we were going to ask some lovely people 3 questions about philosophy. So we'll fire ahead. But actually first, I suppose to introduce you in case people have forgotten, I was saying on last week's video that you're like our in-house philosopher or our resident philosopher. So and we did have a session just before we finished up at the bookshop, where we talked about the beautiful coincidence and how climate change was forcing us to think differently. But of course now we have another beautiful coincidence. Okay, but we won't go into that so much because I'm going to ask you just our 3 simple questions. So I'll just start. So the first one is just what you think philosophy is, or to get your perspective, what is philosophy anyway?
Okay. Hello everyone. You just said you'll ask me 3 simple questions. The first one doesn't prove too simple. I suppose, looking from a perspective of a trained philosopher, as in academically trained philosopher, I always think about philosophy in those 2 categories. More philosophy that is more academy based, or that focuses on history of philosophy, of the history of ideas, of history of philosophers. And the other one is more like personal lives philosophy. We kind of, all of us would at some stage in our lives have some kind of think about what we think the life is about, maybe, or how live a good life. And those questions are definitely something that philosophy is asking about. And looking from this perspective, I thought about this a little bit. And recently there was a guy who believed in the whole flat Earth theory, and he built his own rocket. And unfortunately, he died trying his own rocket. His first experiment wasn't so fatal, but the second one proved fatal. But he actually he built his own rocket, and he went up as far as he could go. But unfortunately, he ended up dying in the experiment. But yet, he presented this kind of curiosity, this perseverance of trying to find the answer, trying to find the truth. And when we put this and apply this to kind of philosophy, if you don't study history of philosophy, as the people who study philosophy would do, you're a bit like that man, because you're trying on your own. There were people before us who taught a lot about different things, and a lot of questions were answered. A lot of questions led to another questions. So if you disregard the history of philosophy and the history of ideas, there's nothing wrong with that, but you might find yourself trying to figure out things that were already figured out a long time ago, and making the same mistakes that were done in philosophy in the last 2,500 years. I think this thought comes from Daniel Dennett. This is the book I'm recently reading, Intuition Pumps, and that's what he says. That when you're studying philosophy, you're just trying to learn about those mistakes that were done, so you can actually move forward. So in philosophy, trying to make it simple, I suppose, the 2 things that stand out for me is a wonder. To wonder about things, wonder about life, wondering about the universe, wondering about your own life and your own role in all this. And the other is kind of constructive reflection, reflection on life, that you think about it, you're trying to make sense out of it. And of course, in the traditional philosophy, you have these big systems of thoughts where people build their own answers the universe, how things are, right? And then somebody else came and now said, no, that's not the way. It's a different way. But they're always trying to kind of reflect on life and trying to find the answer and pursue, I suppose, the reality itself.
Yeah,
so,
and
I don't know.
yeah, I suppose you've kind of answered the next question. And yeah, interesting what you said. I mean, that's a brilliant example about the guy with the, you know, flying flat, and, you know, understanding the history enables us to not go over the same ground. I love that idea. And I suppose moving on to the next question, it's why do we bother with it? I mean, you've answered some of that question already, but why do we bother with philosophy then? Like, what difference does it make to the world that we do have this history and we do have this system? What difference does it make, and why should we engage with it?
So really a lot of things that we're surrounded with, a lot of things we've learned at schools, and a lot of things that we do and we think about the world are grounded in philosophy itself. Those ideas that were developed like from Greeks till now, so the over 2,500 years, they kind of penetrated all the aspects of our lives, and we might not be aware of this. And you know, you might want to disregard philosophy as something that's totally not useful or anything. But you know, any ideas that we have in science, economics, any kind of worldviews that we have informed, they are in a way based in some ideas that came from people thinking about reality. You know, from the first one, I suppose, the Pythagoras, who called himself philosopher, loving the wisdom. You know, there were people who devoted their lives to trying to cultivate this, you know. And on a practical level, in our day, on our age, I suppose there are a few things that we will need philosophy for. One is ethics. That ethics will always be there. So recently, you know, we have discoveries like genetic discoveries, and there's a thing called CRISPR that we can change genes now, for example, right? But like, is it ethical to change our own genes? You know, is it good? And what kind of consequences would that have for the society? And this is not, it's not a biological question. It's a question, you know, of ethical. It's an ethical question, which is part of philosophy, I suppose. Another one is the intercultural dialogue that we need to have, you know, in the more kind of global society. If we don't use this philosophical approach of being open, trying to exchange the ideas, consult them between each other, and trying to figure it out where we stand on this, it's going to be hard. So this is where philosophy has a big role to play, I suppose. Things like problem of consciousness, you know, still one unanswered question, and it is still kind of more in the field of philosophy than biology. And also in my own personal kind of world, I think philosophy has a big role to play in reevaluating education. Because the education that we kind of inherited from the Prussian model is not really perfectly suited to modern age, and doesn't promote necessarily the skills that we have. And again, the skills that philosophy promotes, like critical thinking, logic, arguing in a right manner, being able to exchange ideas, being creative about them. This is what philosophy teaches us. If you're trained in philosophy, I suppose this is what this is how you can improve on your education. Look at, you know, learning from different perspective.
Yeah, so it does a lot. And we look forward to doing some more of that at the shop when we're open again. And then finally, you mentioned Pythagoras there, but do you have a favorite philosopher, or who might that be?
To be honest, I never had one. You know,
yeah.
I was thinking about this because this question arose a few times in my life, and I never had one because, especially when you're learning all this, like I spent 5 years studying philosophy in university, and you know, every year we had hundreds new philosophers to discuss and learn about, and you know, there was always some next ones that were coming, and we're trying to maybe, you know, to improve on the others. And they were exactly like philosophy is, you know, there is no final answers to some of the questions, you know, and I never found the perfect one. Personally, I think that the one that I would always come back to is not actually from our Western culture, it's from the Asian culture, is Buddha himself. And I suppose that the Buddhist philosophy puts a big value on ethics and how to live a good life, and learning a lot how to deal with the main questions about life and death and sickness and the lessons of impermanence. And also, unlike the Western tradition, it gives some tools of techniques like meditation, mindfulness, and all those things that comes with it, and then maybe Stoics had a little bit themselves in our Western tradition, but not so much. And then recently, I also love Sam Harris, which is like more like a commentator, a little bit philosopher, neuroscientist, but he, and if people know him or not, do they like him or not, he does something great. He actually opens in conversation. He has a podcast called Making Sense, and he puts difficult problems to an open discussion, which I really like and value. Do you know?
What was his name again? Sorry, Lucas?
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Lucas. Well, it's a sunny Sunday, and I know you kind of want to go off cycling, so thanks so much. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Lucas. That was brilliant. And next week, we will definitely have Sarah Chargewell on. She was supposed to come on this week, but she kind of got tied up with some other work. And she'll be discussing Behold America and talking about philosophy to read.
Yeah, we look forward to that. So thanks, Holly. Thanks, Lucas. And we will have Holly's books in, you know, for sending out to people next week. And that's it, I think, for this week. So thank you.
And stay safe. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.